Alex Nowrasteh, the Director of Immigration Studies at the Cato Institute Center for Global Liberty and Prosperity. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So give us an idea, where do things exactly now stand with DACA and these 700,000 or so recipients who are really in limbo?
So we're just waiting for the Supreme Court to rule. They heard the oral arguments today, and I suspect that given the makeup of the court, given the quality of the arguments and the comments today, that they will probably side with President Trump on this issue. And in the next several months, we're going to hear a ruling that will basically terminate DACA.
And so in terms of some of the factors that they were considering when you were looking at the comments, what do you think was really sort of tipping it one way or the other?
So there were comments by some of the justices saying, why are we even hearing this? This is something that the president can cancel. If previous administration put in place an executive action creating it, then the next administration can remove it. And then the other comments were basically, this is clearly not allowed in statutes. I mean, this is a controversial statement, I think, from the legal community standpoint, but enough justices were saying that I would unfortunately bet on the side of Trump prevailing here.
Now, obviously, that wouldn't be welcome news for the tech industry. We saw that back in 2017, more than 800 leaders from major tech companies, from Google to Microsoft to Facebook, really urged the president and lawmakers to either establish a bipartisan DREAM Act or similar legislation. But why are tech companies so interested in this? Well,
I think there's two reasons. One, it's an extremely popular policy. I mean, the vast majority of Americans want to see a way for these folks to be able to stay here lawfully forever. The other reason is hundreds, in some cases, almost 1,000 employees in some of these firms are DACA recipients, and they would have to be fired. So, for instance, Tim Cook of Apple, who's been very outspoken on this, has pointed out that about 443 of his employees are DACA recipients. And one of the most costly things for a firm to do is to fire large numbers of employees all of a sudden, especially due to a legal change. So there's an element of this is popular, we want to get on this popular bandwagon, but also out of economic self-interest.
So then how common is it when you see like some of these huge companies getting involved in a case that they're not actually a party to?
So it's not uncommon. When you see big economic issues like DACA or a lot of other types of regulations and rules out there, it's not uncommon to see big companies weigh in and say this will affect their bottom line. I mean, lots of different firms, interest groups always file briefs like this. It's just that this is such an issue that basically the vast majority of Americans agree on, where there's a sympathetic population, that we're just seeing a lot more of this than usual.
Now, we know that in that same letter, tech leaders said that the U.S. economy would lose about $460 billion from national GDP and about $24.6 billion in Social Security and Medicare tax contributions. Give us some context as to how perhaps losing these DACA recipients would impact the U.S. economy.
Yeah, and those are just like some estimates. There are some estimates that are much larger than that. My former colleague, Ike Brannon, did research on this, found that federal revenues would go down by about $93 billion over the course of 10 years by forcing a lot of these folks from working legally to working illegally, because the vast majority of them are not going to be deported. They're not going to leave the United States no matter what government policies are in place. So we're basically going to lose out on a lot of their tax revenue. And one of the other factors from working in the black market illegally is that they're less productive. You know, the employers have to watch out for government enforcement. As a result, they just can't be as productive. Their wages are lower. The government loses out on revenue, and we lose out from the lost production of goods and services that we'd otherwise enjoy.
And it's interesting, you mentioned some of the people who may end up sort of in this black market outside of the legal immigration. And outside of tech, according to the U.S. Census and Labor Department, it's private households that employ the highest percentage of undocumented immigrants of any American industry. And these are people who not only do work, but also make it possible for other citizens to go to work, to earn and contribute to the economy. If this decision does go the way that the DACA recipients don't want next year, how soon could we see the fallout?
So I think what will happen is, even if it's canceled, say tomorrow, let's say the Supreme Court comes out with a ruling tomorrow, which I don't expect, but even if they did, then it would probably take a couple years to unwind. DACA recipients have a 2-year work permit. I doubt they'd cancel it and cut it off immediately. What President Trump wants to do is basically say nobody can reapply, no new people can enter, and then people who are on there who, let's say, recently reapplied, they have a 2-year permit, they have 2 years before their work permits expire. So it's going to be sort of a slow bleed of people falling out of legal status, falling into the black market where they were before.
And certainly will be interesting since obviously the US presidential elections will fall within that period. Thank you so much for your insights. Alex Nowrasteh there, Director of Immigration Studies at the Cato Institute Center for Global Liberty and Prosperity.